Okay, great. Welcome back to another episode of Index Office Hours. Thank you all for joining us today on the 17th of May, where we are hosting Index Office Hours 61. So I am very excited, as I always say, for today's episode because we have a fantastic set of guests and we are going to be covering some very interesting topics that range around, that are around protocol and network operations. So, as we like to always do, I'm going to kick us off with the opening remarks. And the first thing is to give a shout out to 𝗨𝗂𝗧𝗂. So, this week, episode 64 from 𝗨𝗂𝗧𝗂 came out, and it is with Cami, who is a familiar face, as some of you may know in the ecosystem. She does DevRel for the Graph. And that was a really interesting conversation where she kind of told us a bit about her story in the world of DevRel, how she got into blockchain and what she's doing to kind of uplift women in the space of blockchain. So if you guys have the opportunity, I'd highly recommend to go check out that particular episode. So as another staple of the opening remarks, I'm going to give a shout out to Graph Day. That is happening on the 2nd of June. I want to let everyone know, I'm sure you guys already know, but it's always good to give you guys an extra reminder that all tickets are now only $100. So if you haven't already got your tickets, I'd highly recommend to do so. This is going to be one of the most important events for the year for the Graph ecosystem. There's going to be some of the sharpest minds all in the same space in San Francisco. So be sure to get your tickets. And then there's the hackathon happening from the 3rd to the 5th. Straight after. So there it is. That's opening remarks. Kept it nice and brief. We have a beefy conversation today. So without further ado, I hand it over to Anna for Repo Watch.
Thank you, Abel. Hello everyone to Repo Watch. As always, links to all of the release notes and PRs will be found on the agenda. And before we start talking about major blockchain clients, I want to remind you that recently we've updated the flow to only mention clients that have had a new release. All other repos will still be found on the agenda with the details on their last release version. Another quick reminder that recently Aragon has started releasing 2 versions, so version 1 or beta versions and version 2 or alpha versions. If you're looking to migrate from Aragon 1 beta versions to Aragon 2 alpha versions, you will need to sync from scratch as the data models are not compatible. Similarly, the Streaming Fast team has started supporting both Ethereum block version 1 and 2. With this, please be aware that streaming SF-GET versions that end in FH2, so Firehouse 2, are for Ethereum block version 2 and are not currently production ready. And with that, we have had a new release on Aragon version 2. The release is 2022-05-04 alpha. And this mainly includes all sorts of fixes from recent releases, but one fix that's important mentioning is a fix that addresses the stack header downloader that gets stuck right after snapshots. Another thing that this release includes is Ropsten block snapshots are added and enabled by default, and then Ropsten TTD, terminal total difficulty, was added to the configuration. To give you a bit of more context on TTD, so the highly anticipated Ethereum fork will not be activated based on a block number like before, but rather when proof of work mining difficulty will exceed a certain value. So that value is known as TTD. And if you're interested to read more about this, I'm gonna drop a link into the stage chat. These are all of the changes we have on major blockchain clients. So before moving to GraphStack, has anyone had anything they want to report, whether they've tried the new Aragon version or just anything to do with the blockchain client?
Yeah, we rolled out the latest alpha, Aragon 2 alpha that you mentioned. And I think I mentioned in a prior IOH that we had seen that header stuck issue on BSC and Ethereum mainnet. And yeah, the latest release fixes that. So thumbs up.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? Okay. Moving on to the GraphStack. On GraphNode, we haven't had any new releases, but I'd like to mention a pull request that was submitted by Leo, which addresses issue 3500, which is incorrect WASM stack traces. And on indexer service and agent, no new releases. Has anyone had any good or bad recent experiences with the GraphNode and indexer service or agent that they'd like to report, or anything to add on the whole repo watch?
I can add something to my indexer agent experience, but it's not necessarily related to repo watch. So I've been trying this like basically just the agent to close out allocations that have like basically failed subgraph allocations, such as like stuff like open or mstable or whatnot. But it seems unable to generate a POI for those failed allocations. So I'll be chatting with Ford. Maybe we can get that fixed soon.
Thanks for sharing that, Payne. Do you have an issue for that?
Not right now. I'm first trying to figure out like if it's a problem within the graph node or the indexer agent, and then open up the issue in the specific repo.
Okay, well, if you figure it out, we'll make sure to make an update next week here, if it's something that we need to be aware of. So thanks for sharing. Do we have Juan? Is Juan back?
I'm here.
Nope.
I don't know how my mic is working though.
Oh, it's working. I can hear.
Okay, cool.
Okay, over to you, Juan.
Thanks, Anna. So I'll be covering Protocol Watch quite briefly, but we have a few things that we like to mention. First of all, going into forum governance, we have a new GAP, which is GAP 32, to make the GNS signal transferable. This is basically a small improvement since the curation layer was already capable of this, but the GNS layer for curation was not, due to it not being actually an ERC20 or having even a transfer method. So yeah, it's a small improvement, but it's a decent improvement to GNS. Then we have GAP 31, a small comment from Pablo regarding a new feature for the bridge, particularly call hooks. Yeah, so I won't go into detail, but if you want, there's a few lines explaining the new feature in the forum post, which is linked in the Protocol Watch section. Forum research, no new updates since last IOH. Going into the contracts repository, there are a few PRs. One of them is merged, which is PR 565, multiple tooling improvements and fixes. Yeah, this is mostly tooling improvements, so there's nothing new for the contracts. But yeah, it's always nice to have it in the deployment environment. Then we have GAP 567, yes, which is a work in progress regarding the call hooks functionality for the GRT bridge for Arbitrum. PR 568, which is a work in progress for the GAP 32, the GNS signals transferable GAP. And then we have PR 569, which is also a work in progress regarding the calculation for the rewards. This should also be able to fix the issue that I think Stake Machine had previously pointed out. It's a small fix to some drifting values on the rewards calculation, and also a few other things that we realized with the issue that Stake Machine pointed out. Regarding the subgraphs, there are no new releases aside from a small core network subgraph release, which was just a resync. Actually, it was just a non-change so that we can create a new IPFS hash and resync the subgraph, since we detected a small possible non-deterministic issue for graph node with that particular subgraph, which was really hard to track. So we wanted to preserve the database status for the previous, not failing, but slightly non-deterministic network subgraph. So in order to be able to debug it and make sure that we fix it, we wanted to keep the database, so we post it. And in order to have the core network subgraph still running, we deployed a new version with not any change, but a different IPFS hash. That's about it for Protocol Watch. I'll hand it over to Chris for the open discussion.
Cool, thanks. Juan, did anyone have any comments on Protocol Watch before we move on? Cool. Okay, in this case, I'm going to hand it over to Payne, who is going to talk to us about a testnet revival.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Chris. So yeah, I've in the last couple of months I've been in charge to try to revive the testnet as much as possible, and to basically just the idea was to give everyone in the community, like whether your role is a subgraph developer or an indexer, to like give you the ability to like participate in the testnet and learn how the protocol works. Right now, there's basically nobody using the protocol, like the testnet protocol as intended. There's no indexers indexing subgraphs there that were published. Thus, subgraph developers cannot like benefit from publishing their subgraphs there and whatnot. So, yeah, I want to kickstart the discussion basically around the like what the testnet should be. I know I've talked with Chris in the last Indexer Experience working group chat that maybe it's needed for us to like move all the subgraphs from mainnet also to the testnet, like have a script that mirrors everything that happens on mainnet. But I want to ask everyone's opinion about this. Like, would you rather think this is going to help indexers or any other like protocol roles in any way? Because like, yeah, it shouldn't be that hard to pull off, but I'm just trying to gauge the like the usefulness of doing this. And also speaking about testnets, apparently 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗵 will be deprecated. So this is my chance to ask Ariel, which chain do we switch the testnet to? Because right now we're using 𝗨𝗃𝗵 and we need to move over.
I can answer the last question. The network we should be using is 𝗨𝗏. There's a bunch of different projects still using 𝗨𝗃𝗵, so it might be a challenging migration for the ecosystem. Let's say for in our case, like we use we mint an NFT, and OpenSea is using like 𝗨𝗃𝗵 as a testnet. So you can test a bunch of things because many people are using 𝗨𝗃𝗵, but eventually we'll need to migrate. In our case, it's basically a deployment from scratch on the new chain, and asking every participant to start using the new chain. So it's not going to be that hard in terms of work, but maybe the thing that affects the testing environment is like other projects that still are using 𝗨𝗃𝗵 and they need to do a migration. But I think eventually we'll need to do it, maybe sooner than later. I'm not sure 𝗨𝗃𝗵 will still be there after the merge. So that's something we can start planning. The other thing is like we also use 𝗨𝗃𝗵 because Arbitrum is using 𝗨𝗃𝗵 as a testnet, and we are like testing a few things from L1 to L2 transactions. So
I will check with them what's their plan to migrate to a different testnet.
All right, that sounds great. And given that you're here, I want to ask you one question. Like, let's say, right, let's switch to the first part of the subject now, to migrating, not migrating, like mirroring all the subgraphs from mainnet to testnet. Would this be as simple as literally just copying transaction data and resubmitting them on Rinkaby? Like, let's say someone publishes a subgraph. You can read his transaction. You can just take that code and put it into a new transaction on Rinkaby and submit, and then you have everything there, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to interact with the studio in order to get those subgraphs up.
It all depends. Like transactions, it all depends what transactions or actions we are cloning, right? Let's say we clone publish new subgraphs, right?
Yeah.
One of the main issues is like, okay, you should be creating the subgraph on behalf of someone else. Let's say you have a script and it has an address that is sending this transaction. The owner of the subgraph will be this address. So you need to sort of have a set of actions to create the subgraph on behalf of some other address if you want to preserve the ownership, right? So that's something that will be easier with the transfer signal, the GAP number 32, because a bot could be publishing the subgraph, transferring the NFT, and also transferring the signal to the owner of Rinkaby. Okay, so that might be doable. In my case, when you ask about like what's useful in terms of a testnet, in my case is having people using the testnet and watching transactions there. And something I do is like whenever we have an upgrade on mainnet, I first upgrade on the testnet and see that everything is working properly. So that's something that's useful for me. I don't need to have the exact replica of all the subgraphs from mainnet. I need to have a few and some allocations and things like happening. But it might be different for some other participants. Like maybe indexers would like to have more like I don't know, a replica of the data and having more stake or more subgraphs on testnet. In my case, having some action happening, even if it's less than mainnet, it's useful.
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, it's a complex thing because, you know, I think that like the testnet, we should try and aim to create value for multiple stakeholder groups. And like, I fully can kind of understand Ariel's perspective of, you know, as a core developer, you know, wanting sufficient activity within the testnet to be able to, you know, test things and gain confidence and assurance that they work. And I guess without getting too deep into the implementation detail, I think like engaging indexers in the testnet is a very big unlock for creating value for other stakeholder groups, be it core developers, because obviously indexers are really like the most significant interactors with the protocol. But also, you know, subgraph developers and other roles. Like we need indexers to be active before much value can be created for anyone else. And with respect to this particular question of like, you know, do we need to mirror subgraphs? For me, the major reason that we would want to do this is that, you know, generally speaking, like we want the testnet to be this kind of chaotic, you know, representative production environment. You know, so we want it to be on this crazy permissionless testnet where there's all sorts of other stuff going on, because that's exactly what mainnet looks like. And I think we also want to try and recreate as many, you know, edge cases as we can. And so, you know, without mirroring some subgraphs over, we don't really have like a wide range of subgraphs on the testnet, right? So these are subgraphs that touch particular contracts or have a particular like pattern of workload. Maybe they're super event heavy or super ETH call heavy. Maybe they use particular subgraph features. Maybe they use unsupported subgraph features and don't receive indexing rewards or are blocked by the SAO. I feel like we want to try and create all of these conditions and circumstances that exist on mainnet on the testnet. Because if the testnet is like super vanilla, then the utility it creates in actually testing out these edge cases is limited.
Right, but there's also this question that, let's say we start mirroring subgraphs. What do we do with upgrades those subgraphs if we give those NFTs to the original creator, like the wallet? We send those NFTs out. What happens with when there's an upgrade that causes an issue, but we can't mirror that since we've given away the NFT?
Yeah, I think that's fair. This is a whole kind of, if we get into the implementation stuff, like that's a whole can of worms that I think we should try and avoid here. But at the high level, my thought would be that we actually don't need to mirror any GNS level stuff at all. All that really matters is subgraph deployments. And I think if we solely, mirror subgraph deployments, we don't have any of the ownership issues. And generally, right, subgraph deployments are immutable. So like GNS upgrades can continue to happen on mainnet. And obviously, like on mainnet, the kind of canonical hash for a given GNS will be updated to the new subgraph deployment. Like all of that would happen. But on testnet, we just have the first subgraph deployment being mirrored, and then when the upgrade happens, the second subgraph deployment being mirrored. And no kind of GNS stuff on top. Obviously, that compromises, our ability to recreate the curation market in the testnet. Not entirely. Like obviously, testnet only GNS subgraphs could be published and upgraded and so on. But with respect to the mirroring, I don't think that we actually need GNS.
Yeah, I kind of want to hear everyone else's opinion. Yeah, sorry, Ariel, go ahead.
Yeah, no. In my case, it's like looking from the standpoint of the protocol, it's like having enough like chaos happening. Like I don't really care if it's like cloning mainnets, but if people are testing stuff and doing even nasty things on testnet and trying out like edge cases, etc., it's amazing to have to have activity and to start like testing all the different state changes and actions. And if it's a bit chaotic, the better, I would say. Cloning stuff from mainnet is a way to try to bring some activity there. But if we can make it as a useful on-ramp for new indexers, or maybe indexers testing their setups and etc., we will have that in a way. The other part is like maybe the testing of the off-chain components, all the things related to gateway traffic, future verifiability, and other things. I think the testnet should be the place to test all those things and new features. And maybe today we are not making use of that. Maybe Ford, do you have any opinion about that?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, about the how we are using testnet for apart from the on-chain transactions and getting states, like a state that we can use to test upgrades and other things, like the use of testnet for all the off-chain components, like testing a new indexation setup, or testing a new like a gateway change. I don't think we are using testnet as much as we could. For all those components.
So I use testnet all the time for testing the indexer agent and components. Right now, it's effective for testing allocations. We don't really need an active indexer side or query market for testing allocation management. So I use that in the indexer agent, but it's currently not a good testing ground for the indexer service or executing paid queries, because there's just not queries flowing right now. There's not that kind of activity. So if we could update it so that it's effective for testing the query side, that would be really awesome for the indexer experience team and moving the indexer service and agent forward.
Yeah, so speaking of query generation, I managed to put together some script to start generating some very basic queries for the testnet. So my only problem is that it's generating around, like, at the very minimum 15 to 20 requests per second. But if I turn that on for literally all the subgraphs on the testnet, that would be like more queries than the hosted service is serving now, which is yeah, probably, I mean, yeah, not that great, but I'll see what I can do.
Has anyone considered offering some sort of incentive to just people who might be using the testnet, like, you know, break my subgraph, I'll pay you 100 GRT or some small token amount like that? Kind of gamifying it in a way?
Yeah, I was also thinking about this, but like the problem here is, like, how exactly do we gamify things?
Maybe we offer a service to subgraph developers wherein, you know, they can buy a certain bucket of GRT, and then, you know, as they notice queries that come up and break their subgraph, they can post maybe some sort of a side protocol. You know, this query broke my subgraph. Who did this? And then through some sort of like zero knowledge proof or something like that, whomever submitted the query could hypothetically claim that reward. Just kind of a random idea I had.
If I may, this is a really interesting conversation. I feel like we could most certainly go down this thread. If we could maybe chat more about this in the stage chat, or perhaps maybe on the next IOH, because we do have quite a packed agenda today, and I would like to kind of give the space to the other folks to be able to speak to the topics that have been prepared. So yeah, I don't know, was that satisfying, Payne, or would you like to kind of continue this conversation in this stage chat?
Yeah, we can continue the conversation in the chat, or maybe even in the next office hours. We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's definitely a lot of things. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Payne. I was just going to say, I think this is one that, you know, deserves quite a wide berth for conversation. Or perhaps next time we can allocate the time to it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Payne. Let's sync offline, and then we'll get that in the content calendar so we can queue it up for the next IOH.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, wonderful. Well, in that case, I'm going to swing it to Chris to bring us into the Fireside Chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much, 𝗨𝗂𝗧. We're very lucky today to be joined by a number of folks, including Ariel, Ford, Thiago, and a couple of others from Edge and Node. Thank you for joining us. We also have Juan from GraphOps, and today we're here to talk about the Protocol and Network Operations Working Group. And as a reminder, this is as part of our larger series covering the Graph's announced R&D roadmap. So I will kick off by asking a very broad question, which is, how does the Protocol and Network Ops Working Group fit into the broader landscape of working groups? And I will hand it to Ford.
So this working group has a bit of a wider berth than some other ones, but at a high level, it's focused on the required components for running the network. So the network components, including the subgraph availability oracle, something that's coming out soon called the Epoch block oracle, the fisherman for verifying queries, The working group also includes the arbitration team, security bounding group, which does security arbitrage of reports, monitoring and analytics of the network to make sure everything's working as expected, which was especially a focus when we first launched the network, managing upgrades of the protocol, and working on the core of the network subgraph. As well as like moving forward verification of queries and getting us to automation of some of these existing work streams.
Cool. Did anyone have anything to add to that? I guess for future, please, anyone who wants to contribute an answer, please just jump straight in. Thanks, Ford. So yeah, it sounds like it's kind of a mix of, I guess, in short, right, keep the network purring along. And there's kind of a mix of operational concerns and also like implementation concerns. I guess to give folks a picture, as a question to whoever wants to take it, how would we kind of describe the difference between the implementation work that the working group is responsible for versus more of the orchestration and operational work, the type of stuff that goes into or the considerations that must be made when updating a protocol that is actually operating in production and not just a greenfield deployment?
I will take this one. I think that there's two big parts to this to the answer. One is the implementation, and the other thing is how you make the implementation to get to production. The first part, it's a lot of work of like, it's a lot of interaction between the engineering team and the research team. That means that, a new proposal can come from different places. Like, it's not like a centralized process, right? Someone from the community can propose something in a GIP. Maybe a research group of one of the core devs is working on an economic improvement or mechanisms. And so a proposal can come from any place in the community. And that means that someone takes and decides to do an implementation out of a proposal. It could be anyone. Like most of the GIP implementations were done by me or anyone in the smart contracts team. But there are other like implementations related to index agent improvements and other parts of the system that are more part of the maybe the engineering team, right? So that's the first part of the implementation, like looking at the spec, maybe talking about the trade-offs, giving feedback to anyone doing the research or proposing the GIP, and then getting to an implementation that is sound. If the change is related to a solidity, to the contracts, it will go through an audit, and eventually it will get audited. It will get reviewed by the council. But it doesn't end there, right? Like once you have an implementation and it's like getting enough support, it means like you need to orchestrate this change into production. And that means that you need to take into account like backward compatibility, not breaking any client. Let's say if we are removing a function from the contract that is not going to be used, maybe we want to keep it so some old clients can work for a period of time. So there are a lot of things to consider. And also like consider the effects of an upgrade to on the rest of the stakeholders. Maybe like a change will make some people to take some actions, and that will get some to a point where we get some stability in the network. So there are a bunch of things to consider in both cases: implementation and the orchestration of the implementation in production. Yeah.
Cool. And presumably, I guess, yeah, to kind of extend out that pipeline, so to speak, I guess once the change has actually navigated all of the constraints that you spoke about and has made it into production, after that, I guess there's that kind of closing the loop, right? Like monitoring and alerting and ultimately like validating whether the design had the intended outcomes and that kind of feeding back into the research process. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I missed the last part, but once we get some change in production, it's basically monitoring. Sometimes it requires changing the scripts that we already have for monitoring, like network monitor scripts, maybe adding a new alert, maybe setting up some new process to log things. So yeah, clearly, that's the and it's not only about monitoring in terms of like something went wrong, but also like see if the change had the effect that it was proposed in the JP, right? Like if like let's say we do a change in curation and if this change like really getting to the result we wanted, like and like I don't know, the curation market is more active or something. So that's the other part. Yeah, it's like a mix of engineering, monitoring, but also like economic monitoring.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, and that there's a lot of kind of operational complexity that goes into handling these upgrades. So thanks for sharing. So obviously this series is covering the Graph's announced R&D roadmap, and I feel like so far we've covered the kind of remit of the working group and the types of things that it is typically concerned with and focused on. But if we kind of dive into the roadmap, what are some of the specific deliverables that the network operations working group is focused on?
So there's a few high-level topics I can talk to there. And one of them that is going to be probably the soonest deliverable is the Epoch block oracle, which will be used and have a huge effect on the indexer ecosystem. So right now, as an indexer, you technically can index and serve subgraphs that are not on Ethereum mainnet. It's a permissionless protocol, and you're free to do that. People can deploy those, but you cannot receive indexing rewards for those subgraphs. And one of the big blocker for that is POIs and aligning the concepts of time between Ethereum mainnet and other chains. So in order to do that, we're building a block oracle. So there's a canonical source for block times on these other chains that allows indexers to then know which block to submit a POI for and establish consensus on data for other chain subgraphs. So that's a big deliverable coming down the pipeline, being worked on right now. And then another really big one that's more long-term is verifiable indexing and verifiable queries. So right now we have a manual dispute process for indexing. And we do have cryptographically secure hashes for POIs, and we're able to establish consensus, but we have this manual arbitration process for verifying those and for going through disputes and handling those disputes. And so we're going to try to move towards automatic verification of indexing, as well as verification of query responses. So those query responses are the correct query response for the verified indexing data. So that'll be a huge upgrade for the overall protocol and will help us be able to scale much more heavily without having to scale the arbitration team to many humans. There's a few other ones maybe we could speak to, but I think those are really some of the big ones, and maybe people have questions about those now.
If anyone on the stage has a question, please feel free to ask. If not, I have some, so we're all good. Okay, so I guess starting with the Epoch block oracle, yeah. So the way that I kind of see it is the Epoch block oracle, as you said, is required to give the protocol this canonical and deterministic notion of time across chains, and that enables all participants in the network to agree on which POIs should be submitted for foreign chains, and critically, because that data is also available to the protocol via the oracle. The protocol is also in a position to, facilitate those POIs, pay out indexing rewards, and everything else. So is the Epoch block oracle like really about extending the economic data integrity guarantees that we have for data on Ethereum layer 1 to other chains? Are there any other advantages?
Yeah, that would be the main thrust of it. So, like I said, right now you technically could sync or deploy and sync subgraphs from other chains, but you would be missing out on that economic security. So, specifically, Indexer does not have the incentive to provide the correct data that they would have on Ethereum mainnet, and they don't have that slashing mechanism. So, with the Epoch block oracle, we can have consensus on the data on these foreign chains and have the slashing there. So indexers with larger stake have the larger economic security, just as we're used to on Ethereum mainnet. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thrust of the Epoch block oracle. The other one is with indexing rewards coming in for these other subgraphs, it incentivizes syncing them. And having them ready to serve queries. So it should further help to improve and ensure that there's a good quality of service on these new subgraphs. So again, right now, people could deploy subgraphs on these other chains, but I would not expect to have the same quality of service we would have on Ethereum mainnet without that incentive from indexing rewards.
It should also help alleviate the differences in like, I guess, features between the network and the hosted service, because currently, like, the technology allows you to sync any other compatible chain, all EVM chains and Near and a few others, just like you would do in the hosted service. But you're not really able to, I guess, provide the economic security, because there's no, as long as there's low amounts of query fees, you don't have the indexing rewards to back those up. So the main idea behind the block oracle is generating consensus as to which block will be used for the POI generation, and submitting the correct POI to the on-chain, to the L1. So yeah, like I think if we wanted to dive deep into the block oracle, there's a few things we could say, but it might not be. We might not have enough time. I don't know. You let me know, Chris, if we can like maybe more explicitly say what the block oracle is.
Yeah, I think we've got time. If anyone has specific questions about the block oracle, please, we'd love to hear them. Fire away, Juan.
Cool. So currently, like, the block oracle uses the data edge GIP to submit. Well, it's not live on L1, but the current model for the block oracle will be using data edge. And the way that we have that is we will have a Rust service, which Thiago can probably like explain it a little bit better in a few minutes. But yeah, we have a Rust service which will be helping us submit those transactions to the data edge, which will then be decoded by the block oracle subgraph, which will have all of the state for the basically the consensus as to which block should be used for each of the epochs to be able to submit a proper POI across chains. So there's like a loose syncing of the concept of time across networks. It doesn't really need to be complete total ordering. It just needs to be a consensus as to which block we are going to be using for each of the epochs. So with the Rust service, we can make sure that each of the epochs has the latest block usable to submit a POI, and that should be good enough for consensus. Regarding how it's going to be used, it's most likely, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ford, but I think the agent will be using the subgraph for the block oracle to be able to generate the POIs needed in the particular blocks that the Epoch block oracle says it should be produced whenever someone's going to be closing an allocation on a non-Ethereum chain.
Yep, exactly. So the agent will essentially query the output from the block oracle to see what block number it should be producing a POI for when closing allocations.
So yeah, basically the UX for indexers will not change at all. Everything will be handled by the agent itself. So the block oracle is just another piece that we are going to be used to make sure that everything that's going on in the network has consensus behind it. I don't know, Thiago, if you want to maybe tell them a little bit about how the Rust implementation works or something.
All right. The block oracle is actually a really simple Rust project. It's all it does is monitors all the indexed chains that we are interested in. So it keeps polling for the latest blocks for every chain that the protocol will support outside Ethereum mainnet. And once a day or once per epoch, which is roughly a day in Ethereum, it will submit a message to the data edge contract. And that message will contain encoded data about the latest block number for all those indexed chains. So once a day, we are defining what are the most recent blocks for the other networks, for the other blockchains inside the data edge contract. So this information will be later read by the subgraph and decoded, and it will be ready to be used for closing allocations and to serve the rest of the network. So, yeah. And if anyone has any questions about it, the implementation details, I'll be glad to answer them.
Cool. So the Epoch block oracle is, as Juan mentioned, built on top of something called the data edge contract, which is a pattern that was proposed as a GIP by Zach from Edge and Node. He joined us on a prior IOH to talk more about data edge. I've dropped a link to that IOH in the stage chat if you're interested in understanding more. Guess just one tidbit I will raise from that discussion was that with the data edge approach, this Epoch block oracle will actually use pretty much the theoretical lower bound of gas that it is possible to use to post this kind of information on chain, which is super cool. So really cost-effective solution.
Yeah, extremely cost-effective. And all of the decoding and encoding workload is being basically just handled by Rust and then assembly script on the subgraph side. So yeah, pretty much it's the bare minimum that you will be using for any kind of transaction.
Awesome. Well, let's turn our attention to verifiable indexing and querying. I guess, like, first off, verifiable indexing sounds pretty important. And the implication of it is that indexing is not quite as verifiable today as it will be in the future. And you touched on this, Ford, but maybe with that lens, could you kind of clarify the state of indexing today and how verification allows us to take a big step forward?
Yeah, so today, we've been mentioning POIs a lot. I think you're all probably familiar with POI or proof of indexing. So you submit a POI as you close an allocation. And as all indexers are submitting their POIs, we can come to consensus on what that data is for a particular subgraph deployment. This is great, but how do we manage cases where an indexer has different data than the consensus? So right now, that is managed through a dispute process and arbitration. So you can submit a dispute saying that you dispute the data from another indexer based on the POI they submitted. And then we go through an arbitration process with Ariel and I, and we have a few other members of the arbitration team to investigate these. And so it's a human process. It involves a pretty deep investigation, looking at on-chain data, looking at that indexer's stack, trying to gather their logs and understand what happened and whether or not that indexer should be slashed for the POI they submitted. Of course, this process is not going to scale to millions of subgraphs, to hundreds of chains, or to the places where we would like the graph protocol to go. And so automatic verification of the indexing data will remove that arbitration process and allow a more cryptographic comparison, automated comparison of the POIs. And that data will include not just the last delta change. So right now POIs are just deltas, but it will represent all the data for that subgraph and allow a very quick automated comparison of all the data. The overall goal of this verification is not to introduce consensus, which we already are able to do, but to allow it to scale and be efficient. And then following from this ability to verify all of your subgraph data will be verifiable queries. So right now we have a fisherman, which is a component that monitors queries coming in through the gateway, compares those query results with query results on a indexer that is connected to the fisherman. And each query has an attestation with a proof, and it's able to verify whether or not that query is what was expected based on comparing with another indexer. So that requires this assumption that that indexer the fisherman is using is a source of truth. So rather than have a trusted source of truth indexer that's a single indexer connected to the fisherman, verifiable queries will automate the process of saying, did this query result have the correct data based on that query that came in and based on the data that that indexer should have for that subgraph. So the verifiable queries builds on verifiable indexing and allows us to verify that that query response data was in fact the correct data for that subgraph at that time for the query body that came in. So to summarize it, it's basically automating what currently is being done by the fisherman and what currently is being done by the arbitration process.
Awesome. Thanks, Ford. Yeah, huge unlocks for scalability. Each quite different, but super important. And am I right in clarifying that proofs, or query proofs, the attestations that come along with queries, will be cryptographically kind of verifiable as valid as a kind of derivation of the updated proof of indexing?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Like I was alluding to, the updated proof of indexing will then be an input to the proof of query, essentially. So you'll have that proof of indexing, which represents the data the indexer has for that deployment. And then you have the query body that came in, and that should be for a specific point in time. So maybe a block hash. And then with those two, you should have a single correct query response that should come out from that. And verifiable indexing will be able to have a hopefully pretty efficient prover that can automatically prove that that query response was the correct response for that query body and for that POI or for that data.
That makes sense. It seems to kind of functionally extend the security properties of verifiable indexing into the query layer without the need to do any comparisons or rely on any trusted parties. So that's super cool.
Exactly. And, beyond the fact that this allows us to scale and, reduce RLNI's arbitration responsibilities, which is awesome. I love that. This gets us to a place where consumers can quickly verify that they're getting the data that they expect, that the data is correct, and there doesn't have to be a dispute process afterwards or any time or work being done by them or others in order to verify that data. So in just as the internet's concerned in general, I think this is just a huge development, having all the data that's coming into your browser from a DApp be verified as correct pretty much instantaneously.
Yeah,
as far as I know, this is not something that I've really seen out there yet.
Yeah, that's super cool. Particularly that verification being done by the end client and to have cryptographic guarantees. That is, pretty mind-blowing. Thanks for sharing, Ford. I guess, we've got 1 minute. I'm going to stretch us and maybe ask one slightly controversial question, or at least from the outset, what looks like one. Today I know that one of the advantages of arbitration or handling disputes in the meat space is that it creates room for discretionary judgment, right? So like if something clearly went wrong with a component in the stack, or the kind of data determinism outcome or non-determinism outcome was not really the fault of the indexer, at least in the present environment, the arbitration charter and the dispute process would protect an indexer in that position. As we move to verifiable indexing and the contract, the contracts and the protocol are capable of directly determining that outcome themselves, is there still room for discretionary outcomes, or like how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, that's tricky. So it's not as simple as just adding this cryptographic proof, this efficient cryptographic proof to the system, right? So there's a lot that has to happen to make it so that we can remove the arbitration process. And I imagine we won't do that immediately once these proofs are done. But a few things that come to mind are, graph node determinism is something that needs to be 100% verified, or there needs to be some way of doing arbitration if there's issues there. And then there's plenty of other infrastructure issues that could happen outside of graph node that we'll need to figure out how to either continue the arbitration process and just really pare it down, or find ways of proving correctness there as well. But that's definitely some work that's still in research, and it's not an easy solution, I would say. Great point.
Yeah, I see that. And I guess the answer is probably, some mediation. Like if we can leverage proofs for the happy path and make the majority of disputes just seamlessly resolved, that's still an amazing outcome.
Absolutely, yeah.
Amazing. Well, with that, we are slightly over the top of the hour. I just want to give a huge thanks to Juan, Ford, Ariel, and Thiago, and anybody else who contributed today. Very grateful. And I will hand it back to Abel. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was certainly an interesting and also entertaining conversation. Thank you all for attending. As we usually do every single week, we have a poll out for you, and it is IOH Ops. That's all capital letters, IOH Ops. There you have it. Go ahead and claim that on the app. Thank you all for attending, and we will see you next week. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.